Welcome to the rebellion.
Greetings and salutations. I'm here with my spoiler-free review of Andor Season 2, the entirety of Andor Season 2. So I'd already recorded, as I was watching it, in the 3-episode arcs it's going to air in, I did record my spoiler thoughts after each arc, and where my speculation could be pure, as I guess what's going to happen, and maybe I'm right, maybe I'm not. So you can check those out in the weeks to come. But let's dig in here with my overall thoughts on having this wonderful, wonderful show back in our lives. Look, Andor continues to be a fantastic television series and just a really fascinating and unique part of Star Wars. I do not think that this is how Star Wars should always be, like I see some people say. Its very nature, its adult-aimed, introspective, sometimes very dark and bleak tone is not what I think Star Wars is at its core, which I think is a family space adventure. But Andor shows the opportunity to do these kind of special projects where you can show a different side to this universe, and it does it so well. Season 2, I think, goes even further with showing the different approaches to what it means to be a rebel. And the idea that there is the core rebel alliance that we met in the original Star Wars films. But now you've got Luthen, who is very much about operating in the shadows and crossing ethical lines in a larger and more dubious way. And then you have someone who's even more fringe, arguably, in Saw Gerrera. And, that raises the question, is there a right way when you were in this situation dealing with something like the Empire? Is there a right way to battle them that one of these groups is correct about versus the other? Or do you need all of them and there are different ways to succeed? Or is it a push and pull? I love that we're getting to explore this issue here. The cast of Andor continues to be exceptional. I think Diego Luna delivers such a emotional, soulful performance, even more so here in Season 2, as we see Cassian kind of aim towards the man we met in Rogue One. Genevieve O'Reilly gets a lot of terrific material. As we get ever closer to where we know Mon Mothma must finally discard her role as a senator within the Empire and become a public face of the rebels, she is kind of the one given the big speech moment that Stellan Skarsgård so famously and wonderfully had in Season 1, and she nails it. It's a really stirring, emotional part of the show. Andor can feel frighteningly topical at times, and I think even more so with Season 2 because of when it's airing, and there's always going to be people who say, keep politics out of Star Wars, or they'll say, don't look for any meaning within the show you're watching. And I always think that's sort of a spectacularly foolhardy and ultimately unrealistic way to view art. And I think every piece of Star Wars media is art in its own way, and that even goes for the holiday special and those 1980s Droids and Ewok series, but especially for Andor. Let's just say that what the show is presenting here as far as an authoritarian regime and the methods they use and the way they manipulate and discard people, I think it's very difficult to not see parallels to our modern day, and then also to both feel upset by what you're seeing, but also motivated by how the heroes respond to this. The show goes really deep this time about propaganda and how the media can be used to turn a group of people into an evil other just by the actual evil people pulling the strings, doing what they want to do and getting the right people to deliver the message they want. Executive producer Tony Gilroy and his writers have a lot to say, and I think the show's messages are very worth listening to, and they very much resonate in this modern era that it's airing in. All of that being said, I don't think this season is quite as strong as the first one, and the reason for that is the storytelling approach, even though I know that this storytelling approach was basically the only way we could get a second season. The original plan for Andor, as first conceived, was it was going to be 5 seasons, and each year was going to take us 1 year closer in the timeline to Rogue One and the events of that film, except that got changed to only doing 2 seasons total, so Season 2 is basically telling us a story that was going to once be told over Season 2, 3, 4, and 5, and it's now in the sort of 3-episode arcs that are going to air over the course of 4 weeks. So I'll once again stress that I think this is a exceptional television show, and this is another great season of TV, while also acknowledging that you do feel the strain of those time jumps. And there are multiple times when you feel that, as far as important events that have to happen off screen, and yet now they need to be quickly relayed to the audience through exposition dialogue so we can understand how and why things are different now when we pick up with the next story arc. And there are sometimes this works very well, and there are actually sometimes where it adds to the intrigue because we begin, the next episode of the show and the next time jump off kilter, trying to figure out what is the new normal at this point, and that can be exciting. But there are other times where it's like, damn, I wish we got the full episodes that once upon a time clearly would have happened here, that would have shown us these events that we are now being told about. Because sometimes it's really changed the characters' perspectives in ways that is sort of a little tricky to catch up on. And I do think this hurts a couple of the supporting characters more than others. Cyril continues to be, I think, a super interesting part of the show, but there are moments that I think would have landed better if some of those gaps had actually been depicted. And some of the sort of second layer supporting characters, and I consider people like Vel and Cinta and Young, the Imperial that Luthen is kind of forcing to help him, they are clearly lessened this season in screen time and impact because there just wasn't enough time to show everything that would have occurred with them. But I need to acknowledge that it's clear from interviews Gilroy has done that if he hadn't agreed to this plan, there was probably no way they were ever going to finish the show. It was just way too expensive to continue for 5 seasons, especially once the sort of streaming boom dropped out and suddenly Disney Plus, like everyone else, wasn't as eager to throw all the money into the streaming series. So I will 100% take what we got because it is a great show and because I'm so glad that we got closure here, even though there are times I will still lament what could have been in the reality where we got season 2 through 5. There is actually a supporting character from season 1, though, who gets more to do this time out, and that is Clea, played by Elizabeth Dulau. I found her to be a really cool part of season 1 as far as her role assisting Luthen, but then also really challenging him, we saw at times. And as season 2 progresses, we get to see more of her and we learn more about her. And it just made me really adore this character. It really made me think of her as sort of one of my favorite Star Wars characters now. On the Imperial side of things, Denise Gough continues to be so excellent as Deirdre Miro. And I also really always enjoy the attitude that Anton Lesser brings as her boss, Partagaz. These characters, need to be compelling and they need to be worth following, and you want to see their vulnerabilities and their humanity, all of which we do see. And yet at the same time, we are reminded that they are very much important parts of a murderous fascist society with the Empire, and that they are, willing participants in that. And I think that this season really reflects that dichotomy that season 1, of course, set up. But you see that even more here. And the conflict that brings within you as a viewer, because it's like you find yourself kind of rooting for them and then realizing, oh my gosh, I should not be rooting for these characters at all. But they're so interesting at the same time. So I really kind of enjoy that push-pull we get here through the season. And then there is Krennic. I love Rogue One of my favorite Star Wars films, and I thought that Krennic was one of the best parts of that movie. It is so great that Ben Mendelsohn is back in this role this season. He is such a terrific actor. He continues to be terrific in the role, and what's cool here is that we get to see sort of a different side of Krennic, because this is a Krennic where everything's coming up Krennic, and he doesn't have Tarkin breathing down his neck at this point. He really gets to kind of be the one calling the shots, and so yeah, he's more intense. There is more of an edge to him than what we saw in Rogue One, and I don't think that Rogue One doesn't match. I think we're seeing him just at a different point in the timeline, and having all the reason in the world to be confident, even though we know things are not going to turn out so great for him in the long run. The final episodes, it's been discussed by Gilroy and the cast, really aim us right into Rogue One, and I think it works really well how it does that. I realize the entirety of Andor as a series works as a lead into Rogue One, but especially those final 3 episodes, that final arc, to watch that and to think about going right into Rogue One, and then from that into the original Star Wars film, Episode 4, A New Hope. It's just this really cool way that you can now have this expanded look at a very compressed part of the timeline, a very pivotal part of Star Wars history, and now you can kind of marathon that all together, even though it took 48 years to fill in all those gaps for us to get them on screen. But I look forward to kind of marathoning it on that level. So yeah, I think this season has some more flaws than season one, and that's mostly stemming from the areas in which I wish they could have had more time to breathe, which just wasn't a possibility, but sometimes means that there are some strange shortcuts. But on its own terms, this is just a absolutely phenomenal piece of television, and also it's just an absolutely phenomenal part of Star Wars. It's the best Disney Plus Star Wars series for sure that we've gotten so far. It's just a really special part of Star Wars, in its entirety, and that's saying something given how much Star Wars we've gotten. And I really feel like going forward, I'm curious what the impact of Andor will have in Star Wars as it continues. And part of that is the characters and concepts introduced. There's certainly room to use more of them, especially when you have those time jumps. So I feel like comics and books and maybe animation, there's a lot of places they could have a field day with filling in some of those gaps. But also just the storytelling approach. And that's not saying that I want people to copy what Andor did. I'm just saying it's a great template for, hey, doing something different, showing this other corner of Star Wars that, maybe doesn't fit in with mainstream Star Wars and won't be as, aimed at a wide audience as mainstream Star Wars is, but is certainly worthy of telling in its own right. And, in the case of Andor, just gave us something so fantastic that I'm very grateful to have. Like I said, I'm going to have those videos posting in the next few weeks that I did sort of in real time as I watched the episodes. So you'll get my thoughts on each of the 3 episode arcs and my speculation that is probably going to be off. And I didn't mention some characters. I realized I didn't talk about Bix. I didn't talk about K2SO and Brasso. You'll see what I have to say about all those characters there. That's not because I don't like those characters. I'm just trying to keep things a little more truncated here, so you can check out those videos for plenty more. If you can like and you could subscribe, that would be wonderful as well. All right, guys, may the Force be with you. See you next time.